I never meant for any of it to happen. Let me just start there. I moved in with Nate at the beginning of spring semester. We'd matched through a university roommate finder, and honestly, he seemed like the ideal situation. Clean, quiet, shared my taste in Spotify playlists, and most importantly, gay, but already taken. No weird tension, no risk of messy feelings. Or so I thought. His boyfriend Drew was around from time to time. The first time I met him, I remember being annoyed at how good-looking he was. Not in a bitter way, more like that distant, unavoidable envy that comes with seeing someone who fits the image you wish you could pull off. Tall, broad-shouldered, sharp jawline that looked carved more than grown. He had that casual confidence, like he never had to try too hard to be liked. He shook my hand, flashed a dimpled grin, and said, "Yo, heard a lot about you." I liked him instantly, and that was the problem. I'm not someone who crushes easily. I've had my fair share of flings and awkward, lingering breakups, but I knew how to compartmentalize. Nate was my friend. His boyfriend was off limits. Simple. Except it didn't stay simple. The thing about Drew is that he made himself comfortable in our apartment almost immediately. Not in an obnoxious way, just present. He'd be around late into the evening, lounging on our tiny couch with his socks half off, talking trash during Mario Kart tournaments. Or he'd help with dishes, towels slung over one shoulder like he lived here too. He'd leave his charger in the kitchen, his hoodie on the back of my chair, his cologne floating in the hallway long after he left. He slowly became part of the place. And me? I noticed things I shouldn't. Like how he always took his coffee black, but added sugar only when Nate wasn't looking. Or how he hummed under his breath when he concentrated. Some song I didn't recognize, but eventually caught myself humming too. Or how he always tapped the rim of his glass twice before taking a drink. I shouldn't have been paying attention, but I was. Things started to shift about a month in. It was a Thursday night. Nate had gone to visit his sister upstate and wasn't coming back until Sunday. I assumed Drew wouldn't be around. But around 9 p.m. there was a knock on the door. I opened it and there he was. Gray hoodie, messy hair, looking oddly unsure. "Hey," he said. "Nate told me he left his laptop." I was in the area, figured I'd grab it for him. I let him in. He got the laptop and then he didn't leave. Instead, he lingered in the kitchen while I microwaved leftover Thai food, talking about some podcast he was into. Then we both ended up on the couch, a random show playing in the background, our conversation drifting in that easy, too honest way that only seems to happen late at night. I don't know what it was that made me say it. Maybe the half glass of wine. Maybe the way his knee was just barely brushing mine and neither of us moved. "You and Nate ever think about opening things up?" He looked at me. Not shocked, not even really surprised. He just asked, "Why?" And I didn't have a good answer. The question lingered in the air longer than it should have. I waited for him to laugh, brush it off, say something like, "Hell no," or "What kind of question is that?" But he didn't. He just took another sip of his wine, eyes still fixed on the screen, like he was thinking it over. Finally, he said, "We've talked about it." I turned to look at him. "Really?" He nodded slowly, resting the glass on the arm of the couch. "Not seriously. Just one of those theoretical late-night conversations you have when things feel too perfect and you wonder what's out there." But Nate's never actually wanted to follow through. I didn't know what to say to that. It felt like too much honesty, especially coming from him, especially now. He glanced at me again. "Why'd you ask?" I shrugged, pretending to focus on the TV. "Just wondering." He gave a small smirk, one corner of his mouth tugging up. "You don't seem like the wondering type." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because my mind was spinning too fast. And then he leaned back, his shoulder touching mine, barely. But it was there, and neither of us moved away. We didn't kiss that night. I thought about it. I know he did too, but nothing happened. We sat there, shoulder to shoulder, the show long forgotten, both of us pretending we weren't aware of the tension building, like static between two live wires. He left around midnight, said, "Tell Nate I grabbed his laptop," and walked out the door without looking back. I couldn't sleep. The next few days were a mess. I kept going over it in my head, trying to convince myself it was harmless. Just two guys sharing space. A little wine, a little honesty. Nothing happened, but everything felt different now. When Nate came back Sunday afternoon, I thought I'd feel relief, that things would go back to normal. But Drew showed up that evening, like he always did, and the second our eyes met across the kitchen, I knew I was in trouble. He smiled like nothing had changed. Joked with Nate, gave me a nod, casual and cool, but I saw it. The flicker of recognition, the trace of that charged moment between us. I tried to avoid him after that. Really tried. I'd leave when I knew he was coming over, stay in my room with headphones on, make excuses to be anywhere but around them. But avoidance only works for so long in a two-bedroom apartment. It all came to a head the night Nate had a late shift. He worked part-time at a campus media center and sometimes covered night editing sessions. Drew came over, said he was dropping off something Nate had left at his place. I opened the door, already tense. "You want me to just leave it?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, not meeting his eyes. But he didn't leave. He stepped inside, set the bag down on the counter, and said, "We should talk." I leaned against the kitchen island, arms crossed. "About what?" He gave me that same look, half challenging, half vulnerable. "About whatever this is. Whatever we've been not talking about." I stayed silent. He stepped closer. "I'm not trying to mess with your head, but I can't stop thinking about that night. About what it meant. If it meant something." I should have shut it down. I should have reminded him he had a boyfriend. My friend. I should have done 100 responsible things. Instead, I asked, "What do you think it meant?" He didn't hesitate. That I'm not as settled as I thought. That maybe I'm drawn to more than just what I already have. And then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed, wasn't messy or frantic. Just quiet, deliberate, and terrifying in its intensity. I kissed him back. I don't remember closing my eyes, but I must have. 1 second we were standing in the kitchen, 2 feet of guilt between us, and the next, Drew's mouth was on mine like he'd been waiting months for permission. And I kissed him back. Not hesitantly, not in a way that said this was a mistake. It was hungry, slow but sure, the kind of kiss that didn't ask if it was allowed. When we finally pulled apart, my heart was racing. His breath hitched like he'd just run 10 blocks. "Shit," he whispered. I nodded, voice dry. "Yeah." We didn't say anything for a minute, just stared at each other like we didn't quite believe what just happened. My lips were still tingling. So were my hands. I hadn't even realized I'd gripped his shirt. He stepped back, ran a hand through his hair. "I should go." "Probably," I said, but he didn't move. Neither did I. Instead, he reached out, almost like a reflex, his fingers brushing mine. Just that, nothing more. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. "You're not the only one." He left after that, and this time, I didn't watch him walk away. I stayed up most of the night replaying every second of it in my head. The kiss, the way he looked at me before it happened, the way he didn't apologize, and I couldn't help wondering what it meant for him. For me. For Nate. Nate, who was back the next morning, cheerful and oblivious, complaining about how the Media Lab microwave exploded when someone tried to reheat shrimp Alfredo. I sat across from him at breakfast, trying not to flinch every time he said Drew's name. He said he dropped off my bag. Everything was there, right? "Yeah," I mumbled, forcing a bite of cereal. "Cool. He's been weird lately," Nate added casually. "Quiet," I nearly choked. "What do you mean?" he shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe he's just tired. Or sick of me." I shook my head. "Don't say that." He gave me a curious look. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just didn't sleep much." For the next week, Drew didn't come over. He didn't text, didn't call, and Nate didn't seem to think anything of it. But I did. I thought about it every day. Every time Nate asked if I wanted to order takeout, or watch something on Netflix, or if I'd seen Drew's water bottle lying around. Every moment felt like a test I was failing. Then, late Friday night, just as I was about to crash, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. Not the apartment door, my door. I opened it, half expecting Nate, but it was Drew. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hands in the pockets of his hoodie. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't answer, just stepped aside. He walked in, stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, then sat on the edge of my bed. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said. "I kissed you. That was real, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." I sat on the desk chair, arms folded. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," I said. "You didn't. I'm the one who's with Nate." I nodded slowly. "So what now?" He looked at me, eyes dark, voice quiet. "I don't know, but I can't stop thinking about you." I should have told him to leave, but I didn't. I didn't mean to let him stay. I kept telling myself that as we sat in silence, the air between us thick, with everything we weren't saying. Drew looked like he wanted to move, like he wasn't sure if he should stand or stay seated. I felt the same. "I haven't told him," he finally said, voice low. I didn't have to ask who he meant. "Are you going to?" He ran a hand over his face, looked up at the ceiling like it held an answer. "I don't know." That should have been the moment I told him to leave. Told him this wasn't fair, not to Nate, not to any of us. But instead, I asked something worse. "Do you love him?" He hesitated. "Just a second, just enough." "I do," he said, "but I don't know if I love him the way I thought I did." I looked away. That line between sympathy and self-preservation blurred fast when you're the person someone might be leaving someone else for. He stood up slowly, walked over to where I sat, and crouched down in front of me, resting his hands on my knees. I didn't move. "I didn't expect this," he said. I laughed once, short and bitter. "Neither did I." His fingers tightened slightly, like he didn't want to let go. "Let me stay tonight," he said. I didn't answer, but I didn't push him away either. We didn't sleep together. That's the part one need to make clear. Not that it justifies anything, but we didn't. We laid on my bed, fully clothed, side by side like two idiots pretending we weren't about to detonate the very foundation of our friendship with Nate. He reached for my hand sometime around 2 a.m. and I let him take it. "I don't know what this means yet," he whispered. "I don't either," I whispered back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the front door unlocking. I sat bolt upright. "Shit," I whispered. "He's home." Drew was already awake. "I know," Nate's voice called out, cheerful and unaware. "Yo, you guys home?" Drew looked at me, eyes full of panic. I grabbed his hand, pulled him toward the door. "Bathroom, now!" We shuffled quickly, my heart in my throat. He slipped in, shut the door just as Nate rounded the corner. "Morning," Nate said, grinning. "You look like hell." I forced a smile. "Didn't sleep much." He looked around. "Is Drew here? His car's out front." I shrugged too quickly. "Yeah, he dropped by late. Think he's in the bathroom." Nate nodded, grabbing a banana from the counter. "Cool. I was thinking we could all grab breakfast." I nodded, barely. In the bathroom, Drew was probably having the same panic attack I was. We hadn't done anything, but it felt like we had. That day was torture. The three of us went out to breakfast like nothing had happened. Drew sat across from Nate, and every glance between us felt like a ticking bomb. I kept telling myself this had to end, that I couldn't live like this. But later that week, when Nate was out again, Drew knocked on my door, and I let him in. Letting Drew in again felt like choosing the wrong door in a game where every option ends badly. But there was no hesitation this time. The second he stepped into my room, I closed the door behind him and leaned against it like it might hold the guilt at bay. "I shouldn't be here," he said, not moving. "I know," I replied, not moving either. But we stayed. We didn't talk for a long time, just stood there in that quiet, painful understanding that we were in too deep now. The kind of deep where logic doesn't matter, where the right thing has already been buried under everything we didn't say no to. He sat down on my bed, his fingers steepled, eyes on the floor. "I don't think I can keep lying to him." My chest tightened. "Then don't." He looked up at me. "You think I should tell him?" I swallowed hard. "I think you need to decide who you're actually with." He nodded slowly. "It doesn't feel like I'm with him anymore." It should have felt validating. It didn't. It just made me feel sick. "What are we even doing?" I asked. "You're still his boyfriend. I'm still his friend. This, whatever this is built on lying." He stood, stepped toward me. "Then let's stop lying." But we didn't. Not that night. That night was the first time things escalated. We didn't just kiss. We didn't sleep together either. Not all the way, but there was touching. Slow and uncertain at first. Then, more sure, more familiar. Like we were trying to convince each other that this was real. Afterward, he lay beside me in the dark, both of us shirtless, hearts thudding like we'd run a race we shouldn't have entered. "I hate myself a little," I whispered. "Me too," he said. We stayed like that until almost 4 a.m., when he finally pulled on his hoodie and left. The next morning, Nate made us all pancakes. He stood at the stove, flipping them like a dad on a Sunday morning, completely unaware that the two people sitting at his table had kissed each other breathless 12 hours earlier. I tried not to look at Drew. Drew kept glancing at me like he couldn't help it. Nate was laughing about some professor who tripped over a projector cable, completely oblivious to the fact that the floor beneath him had already cracked. He just didn't know it yet. Later that afternoon, Drew texted me. "I can't keep doing this. I need to tell him." I stared at my phone for a long time. "Then do it," I finally wrote back. But he didn't. Not that day, not the next. Days blurred. We kept going, pretending, slipping up, sneaking touches when Nate wasn't looking, sitting too close, holding glances too long. Every time I thought about ending it, Drew would say something that made me feel like, maybe, just maybe, he was already mine in ways Nate couldn't see. But one night, Nate found my hoodie on the back of Drew's chair. He picked it up, turned it over, and said, "This yours?" I froze. "Yeah." "Why is it in Drew's car?" I had no answer. Drew walked in from the hallway just then, pausing in the doorway, eyes flicking between us. Nate looked at him. "Were you with him?" And just like that, everything began to fall apart. The silence after Nate's question was louder than anything I'd ever heard. "Were you with him?" He asked it so calmly, like he hadn't just dropped a grenade in the middle of the room. Like he already knew the answer and just wanted to see if either of us had the guts to confirm it. Drew opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His eyes flicked toward me for a split second, just long enough to register, but that was all it took. Nate followed his gaze and nodded slowly. "Right." He dropped my hoodie onto the floor like it burned his hands. I stood up, heart slamming against my chest. "Nate, don't," he said, holding up a hand. "Just don't." His voice didn't crack. He didn't yell. That made it worse. "I was gonna tell you," Drew said quietly. "Yeah?" "When?" Nate asked. "After brunch? After we played Mario Kart and you both pretended like nothing was going on?" I felt like I couldn't breathe. "I'm sorry," I said, but it felt useless the second the words left my mouth. He looked at me, really looked, and I could see it in his face. The confusion, The betrayal, the disgust, and worst of all, the heartbreak. "You were my friend," he said. "You both were." Drew stepped forward. "It wasn't planned, Nate. I didn't mean for." Nate laughed. Cold and sharp. "No one ever means for it to happen. That's the script, right? It just happened. I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to go this far." He turned to me. "How long?" I didn't answer. He scoffed. "Wow." And then to Drew. "Get out." Drew hesitated. "Nate, now." Drew walked to the door, paused, looked back at me for half a second. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then he left. Nate sat down on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said again, weakly. "You said that already," he muttered. A full minute passed in silence. Then he stood, walked to his room, and closed the door. I slept on the couch that night. Couldn't sleep, really. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the worst person alive. Over the next week, things got weird. Nate didn't kick me out, but we barely spoke. The apartment felt like a minefield. Every movement echoed. Every breath felt too loud. We coexisted in the way strangers do in waiting rooms, aware of each other, but desperate not to interact. Drew texted me 3 days later. "I miss you. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this." I stared at the message for 10 full minutes before deleting it. He showed up outside the apartment once. I didn't let him in. I don't know what I was waiting for. Forgiveness? Closure? Some sign that we hadn't destroyed something permanently? But it never came. A week after the fallout, Nate came into the kitchen while I was eating cereal. He didn't say anything, just grabbed a water bottle and leaned against the counter. "I'm not gonna pretend like we're fine," he said quietly. "We're not," I nodded. "But this lease has 3 more months, and I don't feel like dealing with the hassle of moving. So let's just stay out of each other's way, all right?" Okay. He walked out. That was the new agreement. I saw Drew 2 more times. Once at a coffee shop, once walking out of a bookstore. Both times he looked like he wanted to say something. Both times I didn't let him. Because there was no more story to write. We told it already. And it ended like this. 3 months came and went faster than I expected. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way routine fills space when everything else falls apart. Nate and I stayed polite, which somehow felt worse than if we'd screamed at each other. He still cooked pancakes on Sundays, but he stopped asking if I wanted any. I still wiped down the counters after dinner, but I stopped making enough for 2. We became ghosts in our own apartment, familiar, quiet, and haunted. When move-out day came, we barely spoke. Just boxed up our things and left our keys on the counter like 2 people ending a business agreement. He stood by the door, bag over his shoulder, and looked at me one last time. "I don't hate you," he said. I nodded, unsure if that made it better or worse. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know." He didn't say goodbye, just walked out. I didn't follow. I didn't see Drew again. Not really. I heard from mutual friends that he moved to the other side of the city. That he'd started dating someone new a few months later. A guy who was nice. Stable. Someone who hadn't betrayed his best friend. I went through a phase where I tried to justify everything. Told myself that love is complicated, that sometimes things don't fit neatly into categories like right and wrong. But the truth is, some things just are wrong. And this was one of them. We had chemistry. We had tension. But what we didn't have, what we never gave ourselves a chance to have, was honesty. Still, not everything ended in ruin. 6 months later, Nate and I bumped into each other at a friend's birthday party. It was awkward at first. The kind of awkward that lives in your shoulders, heavy and stiff. But after a few drinks and enough time, we talked. Not about the past, not about Drew, just about life, work, music, things that didn't hurt to say out loud. By the end of the night, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You seem better." I smiled, trying to be. We're not friends again, not really, but we're not enemies either. And maybe that's the best I can ask for. Maybe some stories don't end with a big romantic moment or a dramatic apology. Maybe they end in a quiet coffee shop 6 months later, where you realize you can breathe again, even if you're breathing alone.